Picture this. You're 21 years old. It's your birthday, and instead of cake and presents, your parents hand you an eviction notice and change the locks. Fast forward 15 years, and those same parents are sitting across from a bank manager, tears streaming down their faces begging to access their own frozen accounts. The person who froze them? Their own daughter they abandoned on her birthday. I'm that daughter, and this is my story. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in Millbrook, Connecticut, I was Madison Sterling, the only child of Dr. Richard Sterling and Patricia Sterling. My father was a successful orthopedic surgeon who owned 2 private practices, and my mother was a real estate mogul who controlled half the luxury properties in our affluent town. The Sterling name carried weight in our community. We were the family that donated to charity galas, hosted elaborate dinner parties, and lived in the sprawling colonial mansion on Elm Ridge Drive that everyone drove by just to admire. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. My parents drove matching white BMWs, wore tailored suits to country club events, and never missed an opportunity to showcase their success. They enrolled me in the finest private schools, hired tutors for subjects I already excelled in, and made sure I participated in activities that would look impressive on college applications. Piano lessons, debate team, volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. Every aspect of my life was carefully curated to maintain their image of the perfect family. But behind closed doors, affection was transactional. Good grades earned me a new dress. Winning a debate tournament meant dinner at an expensive restaurant. My parents' love came with conditions and expectations that grew heavier with each passing year. They never asked about my dreams or interests, only about my achievements and how those achievements reflected on them. Conversations at our dinner table revolved around my father's latest surgical success or my mother's newest property acquisition. I learned early that my value was measured in accomplishments, not in simply being their daughter. Despite this conditional love, I genuinely believed my parents cared about me. They attended my school events, took family photos for their Christmas cards, and bragged about me to their friends. When I expressed interest in studying finance and economics, they seemed pleased. "Smart choice," my father would say. "The Sterling family has always been good with money." My mother would nod approvingly and add, "You'll make us proud, Madison." My childhood was filled with privilege but lacking in genuine warmth. Our house, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, always felt more like a museum than a home. My parents entertained frequently, and I became skilled at playing the role of the perfect daughter during these gatherings. I'd wear my best dress, shake hands with their guests, and answer questions about my academic achievements with practiced ease. The adults would smile and tell my parents how lucky they were to have such a well-behaved, intelligent daughter. What I didn't realize then was that I was essentially a living trophy. Another accomplishment they could display alongside my father's medical degrees and my mother's real estate awards. When I brought home straight A's, they'd post about it on social media. When I received early acceptance to Columbia University, they threw a party where they talked more about their excellent parenting than my hard work. Every success was somehow transformed into evidence of their superiority as parents. The summer before my senior year of high school, I started noticing subtle changes in my parents' behavior. They spoke in hushed tones behind closed doors, and their usual confidence seemed slightly shaken. Business calls that once took place in their home office were now taken outside or in their cars. My mother began working longer hours, often coming home well after dinner, and my father seemed distracted during our family meal. When I asked if everything was okay, they'd give me tight smiles and change the subject. "Just some business adjustments," my mother would say, waving her hand dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about." My father would nod in agreement and steer the conversation back to my college preparations or upcoming exams. I trusted them completely and focused on my studies, believing that whatever challenges they faced, they would handle them with the same competence they'd always shown. During my senior year, I threw myself into my studies with renewed intensity. I had dreams of studying international finance, maybe working for a major investment firm in New York City. My parents had always emphasized the importance of financial security, and I wanted to build a career that would make them proud. I spent countless hours researching universities, writing application essays, and preparing for standardized tests. Every free moment was dedicated to securing my future. My acceptance letter to Columbia arrived on a crisp February morning. I remember running downstairs with the letter in my hand, my heart pounding with excitement. My parents were having coffee in the kitchen, and I burst in with the news. I got into Columbia. For a moment I saw genuine pride in their eyes. My father stood up and shook my hand formally, while my mother gave me a brief hug. They seemed pleased, but there was something restrained about their reaction that I couldn't quite place. The months leading up to graduation were a whirlwind of preparation. College visits, scholarship applications, and endless planning sessions about my future. My parents helped me open my first bank account, taught me about credit cards, and even gave me a crash course in basic investing. Financial literacy is crucial, my mother would say during these lessons. Never depend on anyone else for your financial security. At the time I thought she was just being practical. I had no idea she was preparing me for survival. As graduation approached, I began to notice more changes. My parents' friends stopped coming around as frequently. The usual dinner parties became less elaborate, and my mother stopped buying fresh flowers for the house every week. When I asked about it, they explained that they were scaling back to prepare for my college expenses. It made sense to me. Tuition at Columbia was expensive, and they wanted to ensure I had everything I needed. My 18th birthday fell just 2 weeks before graduation. I was excited about this milestone, finally becoming an adult, about to embark on my journey to college. My parents had always made a big deal about birthdays, hiring caterers, and inviting extended family, but this year they suggested a quiet celebration at home. "You're becoming an adult," my mother said. "It's time for more mature celebration." I was slightly disappointed but understood their reasoning. The night before my birthday, I lay in bed, thinking about my future. Columbia, my finance degree, the career I'd build, everything seemed perfectly planned. My parents had raised me to be independent and ambitious, and I felt ready to take on the world. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, everything I believed about my family, my security, and my future would be shattered forever. I fell asleep that night, still believing I was a cherished daughter preparing for a bright future, completely unaware that my parents had already made the decision that would change everything. The foundation of trust and security I'd built my entire life on was about to crumble, and the girl who went to sleep that night would wake up to a reality that would test every lesson they'd ever taught me about survival and strength. I woke up on my 21st birthday to the sound of my mother's heels clicking against the hardwood floors downstairs. The morning sun streamed through my bedroom windows, and for a moment, everything felt normal. I could smell coffee brewing and hear the familiar sounds of my parents starting their day. I stretched, smiled, and reminded myself that today was special. Not just because it was my birthday, but because it marked the beginning of my adult life. When I came downstairs, my parents were already dressed for work, which struck me as odd, since they usually took time off for family occasions. My father was adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror, and my mother was gathering papers from the kitchen counter. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "We're telling you now," my father said. "Madison, you're 21 years old. Most people your age are already living independently. We've simply decided to accelerate your timeline." I felt like I was drowning. Where am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to pay for college? I don't have a job lined up. I don't have savings. "You have the skills we've taught you," my mother interrupted. "You're intelligent, resourceful, and educated. You'll figure it out." "But it's my birthday," I said, and immediately hated how childish I sounded. "This is my birthday, which is why we chose today," my father said. "Your birthday marks the beginning of your independence. Think of it as a gift. The gift of self-reliance." I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years. The familiar granite countertops, The family photos on the refrigerator, the coffee maker that had been there since I was in middle school, none of it felt real. Are you having financial problems? Is that what this is about? My parents exchanged another look. My mother's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Our financial situation is none of your concern. This decision is about your development as an adult. I need to call someone, I said, reaching for my phone. I need to call Uncle David. Uncle David was my father's brother, the only family member who had ever shown me unconditional affection. David won't be taking your calls, my father said quietly. We've explained the situation to the family. Everyone understands that this is what's best for you. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd isolated me from anyone who might help. You've been planning this for months, I said, the pieces finally clicking together. The business calls, the scaling back, the mature birthday celebration, you've been preparing to get rid of me. We've been preparing to launch you into independence, my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. Madison, someday you'll understand that we're doing this because we love you. Love? I laughed, but it came out as a sob. You're throwing me out on my birthday and calling it love. We're giving you the tools to succeed, my father said. You have your bank account, your credit cards, your education. You have everything you need to build a life. I thought about the bank account they'd helped me open, the financial literacy lessons, the crash course in investing. They hadn't been preparing me for college. They'd been preparing me for survival. How long have you been planning this? Since your senior year, my mother admitted. We realized that continuing to support you would only enable dependency. You need to learn to stand on your own. And you couldn't have a conversation with me about this. You couldn't prepare me gradually. Gradual preparation would have defeated the purpose. My father said, real independence comes from necessity, not choice. I stared at these two people who had raised me, who had been the constants in my life, who had taught me everything I knew about the world. They stood there in their expensive clothes and their beautiful house, explaining why they were destroying my life with the same calm rationality they'd used to discuss a business transaction. I need my things, I said finally. Your belongings are already packed, my mother said, gesturing toward the front door. Your suitcases are in the foyer. I walked to the front door in a daze. 3 suitcases sat there, packed with my clothes and a few personal items. 21 years of life reduced to 3 pieces of luggage. I noticed they'd left out most of my books, my awards, my childhood mementos. They'd kept only what was practical. Your car keys are on the hall table, my father said. The car is yours. It's already transferred to your name. The insurance is paid through the end of the month. I picked up the keys to my Honda Civic, the reliable car they'd bought me for my 16th birthday. At least I wouldn't be completely stranded. When do I have to be out? Today, my mother said. The locks are being changed this afternoon. Today? I turned to face them. You're making me leave today? Madison, my father said, and for the first time I heard a crack in his composure. You're stronger than you know. You'll survive this. Survive? I looked at both of them, these strangers who had raised me. I shouldn't have to survive my own family. I loaded my suitcases into my car with shaking hands. My parents watched from the front door, not offering to help. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, I looked in my rearview mirror to see them already closing the door. No goodbye, no good luck, no see you later, just the quiet click of a door closing on 21 years of my life. I drove aimlessly through Millbrook, past the country club where I'd learned to play tennis, past the private school where I'd spent 12 years, past the children's hospital where I'd volunteered. Everything looked the same, but I felt like I was seeing it all for the first time. This was my town, but I was no longer part of it. I was homeless, cut off from my family, and completely alone. The girl who had woken up that morning expecting a birthday cake and celebration was gone. In her place sat a young woman with 3 suitcases, a car and a bank account, trying to figure out how to build a life from nothing. I had no idea that this moment, this complete betrayal would become the catalyst for everything that followed. The foundation of my old life was destroyed, but I was about to discover what I was truly capable of building from the ashes. The first night was the worst. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner in Hartford staring at my phone screen as I calculated and recalculated my finances. The checking account my parents had helped me open contained exactly $2,847 money I'd saved from birthday gifts and a part-time job at the campus bookstore during high school. My credit card had a $1,000 limit, and I had maybe $40 in cash. In Connecticut, this wouldn't last 2 weeks. I called every hotel and motel within a 20-mile radius. The cheapest room I could find was $89 per night at a roadside inn that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Even at that rate, I'd burn through my savings in a month. I spent that first night sleeping in my Honda Civic in the diner parking lot, using my winter coat as a blanket and my rolled-up sweater as a pillow. The next morning, I drove to Columbia University and sat in the financial aid office for 4 hours, explaining my situation to 3 different counselors. Without my parents' tax information, I couldn't qualify for most aid programs. The FAFSA required parental financial data until age 24, and getting classified as an independent student would take months of documentation proving abandonment. "I understand your situation is difficult," the financial aid counselor said, her voice sympathetic but helpless. "But without your parents' cooperation, there's very little we can do before the fall semester. You might want to consider taking a gap year while you sort this out." A gap year. The phrase felt like a punch to the stomach. I'd been accepted to one of the best universities in the country, and now I was being told to wait because my parents had decided to teach me independence by destroying my future. I called Columbia's deferment office and postponed my enrollment for 1 year. The woman on the phone was kind, but businesslike. "We'll hold your spot, Madison, but you'll need to reapply for financial aid next year. And remember, deferment doesn't guarantee your aid package will be the same." After hanging up, I sat in my car in the Columbia parking lot and watched students my age walking across campus with their backpacks and coffee cups, heading to classes I should have been taking. They looked so carefree, so secure in their futures. I wondered if any of them knew how lucky they were to have families who supported their dreams instead of sabotaging them. I needed a job immediately, but my lack of experience made finding decent employment nearly impossible. I'd spent high school focused on academics and college prep, not building a resume. My only work experience was the part-time bookstore job, which hardly qualified me for anything that paid a living wage. I applied everywhere: retail stores, restaurants, coffee shops, office temp agencies. Most places wanted evening or weekend availability, which I could provide, but the pay was minimum wage. In Connecticut, that meant $13 an hour. Even working full-time, I'd barely afford rent in the cheapest areas, let alone food, gas, and other necessities. After a week of sleeping in my car and showering at a local gym where I'd bought the cheapest membership available, I found a studio apartment in New Haven that rented for $800 a month. The building was old, the neighborhood was rough, and the apartment itself was barely larger than my childhood bedroom's walk-in closet. But it had 4 walls, a bathroom, and a kitchen consisting of a hot plate and a mini fridge. The landlord, Mr. Hewalski, was a gruff man in his 60s who demanded first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit up front. "You got a job?" he asked, looking skeptically at my Honda Civic and my obviously expensive clothes. "I'm starting at Romano's Pizzeria next week." I lied smoothly. I'd applied there but hadn't heard back yet. "References?" I gave him the number for Dr. Patricia Wells, my former pediatrician, who I'd coached through a careful story about being my former employer. She'd agreed to help after I explained my situation, though I could hear the shock in her voice when I told her what my parents had done. The apartment was a 40-minute drive from Millbrook, which meant I saw familiar faces occasionally when I ventured back to apply for jobs. The looks I received ranged from confusion to pity to judgment. Word had spread quickly through our small, gossipy community that the Sterling family had launched their daughter into independence. I ran into Mrs. Henderson from the country club at a grocery store in Millbrook. She'd known me since I was 10 years old, But when she saw me, her face filled with awkward embarrassment. "Madison, dear," she said, her voice overly bright. "How are you enjoying your new adventure?" "It's been educational," I replied, maintaining the composure my parents had drilled into me. "Well, your parents mentioned you're learning valuable life skills. I'm sure it will all work out wonderfully." She hurried away before I could respond, clearly uncomfortable with the entire interaction. I realized then that my parents had crafted a narrative for the community, that this was a planned character-building exercise rather than abandonment. They'd managed to maintain their reputation while destroying my life. Romano's Pizzeria finally called me back, and I started working 30 hours a week for $13.50 an hour. The work was physically demanding, making pizzas, taking orders, cleaning tables, and dealing with drunk college students who treated me like furniture. My hands were constantly burned from the ovens, my feet ached from standing all day, and I smelled like garlic and grease no matter how much I showered. But Romano's became my lifeline. Tony Romano Jr., who managed the restaurant while his father focused on the catering business, took pity on me. He let me pick up extra shifts, taught me how to work the register efficiently, and even allowed me to take home leftover pizza at the end of my shifts. Those leftover slices often constituted my only real meal of the day. "You're different from the other college kids," Tony told me one evening as we closed up. "You work like someone who needs this job." "I do need it," I said simply. He studied my face for a moment. "What happened?" "You don't seem like someone who grew up needing to work at a pizza place." I gave him the abbreviated version, that my parents had decided I needed to learn independence. I didn't mention the birthday ambush or the complete financial cutoff. Even in my abbreviated version, Tony looked, "That's rough, kid. But you're tougher than you look." The months that followed blurred together in a cycle of work, sleep, and survival. I learned to shop strategically, buying generic brands and using coupons like a religion. I discovered which gas stations had the cheapest prices and which grocery stores marked down their produce at specific times. I became an expert at stretching a dollar and making do with less. My car became essential not just for transportation, but for survival. When my studio apartment's heat got shut off for 3 days in November, I slept in my Honda with the engine running intermittently for warmth. When I couldn't afford my phone bill for 1 month, I used the McDonald's Wi-Fi to apply for jobs and check my email. The hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort or even the financial stress. It was the complete isolation. I had no family to call when I was sick, no support system when I felt overwhelmed, no safety net if things went catastrophically wrong. Every problem was mine to solve. Every crisis was mine to navigate alone. I tried calling my parents twice during those first few months. Both times I got a recorded message saying their number had been changed to an unlisted number. They had completely vanished from my life, leaving me to wonder if they ever thought about me or worried about how I was surviving. By December, I'd lost 15 pounds. My expensive clothes from my old life hung loose on my frame, and I'd started shopping at thrift stores to replace items as they wore out. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized myself. The pampered, privileged girl who'd woken up expecting a birthday cake was gone. In her place was someone harder, leaner, and more calculating. I realized I had a choice to make. I could continue struggling paycheck to paycheck, barely surviving, gradually accepting this as my life. Or I could use the anger, the betrayal, and the hard lessons I was learning to build something bigger. My parents had taught me about money, about investing, about the power of financial knowledge. They'd intended those lessons to help me survive their abandonment. They had no idea I was about to use those same lessons to ensure they'd regret ever teaching them to me. The seed of a plan began forming in my mind. Not revenge, exactly, but justice. They'd taken everything from me on my birthday. Maybe it was time to return the favor. The turning point came on a frozen February morning when I was walking to work and slipped on black ice outside the First National Bank of Connecticut. As I picked myself up, brushing snow off my second-hand coat, I found myself staring at the brass nameplate by the entrance, wealth management and estate planning services. Something clicked in my brain, a memory of my mother explaining how she'd structured her real estate investments, how my father had set up his medical practice finances. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and approached the information desk. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, looked surprised to see someone my age inquiring about wealth management services. "I'm interested in learning about estate planning and asset protection," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. She handed me a brochure and smiled. "Are you a finance student?" "Something like that," I replied. That evening, instead of collapsing on my futon after my shift at Romano's, I studied that brochure like it was a treasure map. I researched estate planning online, learning about trusts, power of attorney documents, and asset protection strategies. I discovered that Connecticut had specific laws about elder financial abuse, and that banks were required to report suspicious activity involving senior accounts. The more I learned, the more I realized that my parents had made a critical error. In their haste to cut me off, they'd never changed the emergency contact information on their accounts. I was still listed as their daughter, and emergency contact on multiple financial documents, a remnant from when they'd taught me about family financial responsibility during high school. I spent my days off at the public library, diving deeper into financial law and banking regulations. I learned about conservatorships, about how concerned family members could petition courts when elderly relatives showed signs of financial instability or poor judgment. I studied the requirements for freezing assets when there was suspected fraud or financial abuse. But I needed more than theoretical knowledge. I needed practical experience and credibility. I enrolled in night classes at the local community college, using financial aid to study business administration with a focus on finance. During the day, I worked at Romano's. At night, I attended classes. In between, I studied relentlessly. My grades were perfect, not because I was naturally brilliant, but because I was driven by something more powerful than academic ambition. I was driven by the need for justice. Tony Romano noticed the change in me. "You're different lately," he said one evening as we cleaned the kitchen. "More focused." "What's going on?" "I'm planning my future," I told him. "Good for you. You're too smart to be making pizzas forever." He was right, but pizza making was teaching me patience, attention to detail, and how to work under pressure, skills I'd need for what was coming. 6 months after starting my night classes, I approached Professor Margaret Chen, who taught our advanced financial planning course. She was a former investment banker who'd transitioned to teaching, and she had a reputation for taking promising students under her wing. "Professor Chen, I'm interested in internship opportunities in wealth management or estate planning," I said after class one evening. She looked at my transcript, straight A's across the board, and raised an eyebrow. "You're working full-time and maintaining a 4.0 GPA. That's impressive. What's driving you?" "Personal experience with financial family dynamics," I said carefully. She studied my face for a moment. "There's a small firm I know, Hartwell and Associates. They specialize in estate planning and elder law. The owner, Samuel Hartwell, sometimes takes on exceptional students. Are you interested?" Within 2 weeks, I was working as a part-time intern at Hartwell and Associates, learning the intricate details of estate law, asset protection, and financial investigation. Samuel Hartwell was a sharp man in his early 60s who had built his practice helping families navigate complex financial situations, often involving disputes between generations. "Madison," he said during my first week, "estate planning isn't just about money, it's about power, control, and family dynamics. The families who need our help most are often the ones where trust has broken down." I threw myself into the internship with the same intensity I'd brought to my studies. I learned how to trace asset transfers, how to identify patterns of financial manipulation, and how to build cases for court intervention when elderly individuals were making questionable financial decisions. After 8 months at Hartwell and Associates, Samuel offered me a full-time position as a junior associate. The salary was modest, but it was 3 times what I made at Romano's, and more importantly, It gave me access to professional resources and databases I'd need for my long-term plan. "You have an unusual intuition for this work," Samuel told me during my performance review. "You understand family financial dynamics in a way that's rare for someone your age." If only he knew why. I moved from my studio apartment to a modest one-bedroom in a better neighborhood. I bought my first professional wardrobe, conservative suits that projected competence and authority. I began building a professional network, attending estate planning seminars and bar association events. The work was fascinating and emotionally satisfying. I helped families create structures to protect their assets, resolve disputes between siblings, and ensure that elderly relatives weren't being financially exploited. Every case taught me something new about the vulnerabilities in family financial systems. One case particularly resonated with me. An elderly couple, the Brennans, had given their son power of attorney, and he'd systematically drained their accounts to fund his gambling addiction. By the time they realized what was happening, they'd lost nearly $800,000. We helped them freeze the remaining assets and pursue legal action against their son. "How do you live with betraying your own family like that?" Mrs. Brennan asked me during one of our meetings, tears in her eyes. "Sometimes protecting yourself isn't betrayal," I replied. "Sometimes it's survival." During my second year at Hartwell and Associates, I began researching my parents' financial situation. Using legitimate databases and public records, I slowly pieced together their current circumstances. They'd sold the Millbrook house for $1.2 million and moved to a waterfront property in Sarasota, Florida. My father had sold one of his medical practices and was working reduced hours. My mother had scaled back her real estate portfolio significantly. But the most interesting discovery was that they'd made some questionable investment decisions. They'd put nearly $600,000 into a high-risk real estate development project that was now facing legal challenges. Another $400,000 had gone into cryptocurrency investments that had lost significant value. Their touted assets were much lower than they'd probably anticipated. I also discovered something that made my blood run cold. They'd taken out a substantial life insurance policy on me just before my 21st birthday, a policy that would pay them $500,000 if I died. The application was dated 2 weeks before they abandoned me. The implications were staggering. They hadn't just planned my abandonment, they'd planned to profit from it if I didn't survive. I made copies of everything and stored the documents in a safety deposit box. I wasn't ready to act yet, but I was building a comprehensive picture of their financial vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, I continued advancing professionally. Samuel began inviting me to handle more complex cases, and I earned a reputation among clients for being thorough, discreet, and effective. I also started taking weekend courses in financial investigation and forensic accounting. By my third year at the firm, I'd been promoted to senior associate. I had my own office, my own caseload, and the respect of my colleagues. I'd also begun making strategic investments with my salary, building a portfolio that would give me the financial independence to execute my plan when the time was right. 3 years after being abandoned, I was no longer the frightened girl who'd slept in her car. I was Madison Sterling, senior associate at Hartwell and Associates, specializing in elder financial protection and estate planning. I owned a well-appointed condo, drove a reliable car I'd bought with cash, and had built a solid investment portfolio. More importantly, I'd cultivated relationships with key people in the financial industry. I knew bank managers, court clerks, social workers, and legal professionals throughout Connecticut and Florida. I'd built a network of contacts who trusted my professional judgment and would take my calls seriously. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I'd learned to compartmentalize my emotions, to think strategically, and to plan several steps ahead. I'd become the kind of person who could smile pleasantly while calculating exactly how to dismantle someone's financial security. I'd also maintained my connection to my old life in Millbrook. Tony Romano and I had stayed in touch, and through him I'd learned that my parents occasionally visited their old friends during summer trips north. More importantly, I'd learned that they'd been telling people how proud they were of my independence and success. "Your folks were in last month," Tony told me during one of our phone calls. They showed everyone pictures of some house they bought in Florida. Your dad was bragging about how their tough love approach worked so well with you. Is that so? I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Yeah, they made it sound like you're doing great because they were smart enough to cut you off. Made me sick, honestly. It was time. I'd spent 3 years building my skills, my network, and my case. I'd learned everything I needed to know about my parents' financial situation, their vulnerabilities, and their legal exposure. Most importantly, I'd established the professional credibility to be taken seriously when I made my move. The plan I developed was elegant in its simplicity. It didn't require illegal activity or unethical behavior, just the strategic application of existing laws designed to protect vulnerable individuals from financial exploitation. I drafted a series of letters to various institutions, each carefully worded and supported by documentation. The letters raised concerns about potential elder financial abuse, suspicious asset transfers, and patterns of behavior that suggested cognitive decline or poor judgment in financial matters. The beauty of the plan was that everything I alleged was technically true. My parents had made risky investments. They had transferred large sums of money in ways that could be interpreted as suspicious, and they had a history of making financially motivated decisions regarding family members that demonstrated questionable judgment. On a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 4 years after my 21st birthday, I made the calls that would change everything. My first call was to the Elder Abuse Hotline in Sarasota County, where I reported concerns about an elderly couple who appeared to be making poor financial decisions under possible duress or cognitive decline. I provided their names, address, and detailed information about recent large asset transfers and high-risk investments. My second call was to the fraud department at First National Bank of Florida, where my parents held their primary accounts. I identified myself as a concerned family member and financial professional, expressing worry about unusual account activity and potential exploitation. My third call was to the Social Services Adult Protective Services Division, where I filed a formal complaint requesting a wellness check and financial assessment. Each call was made in my professional capacity as someone trained to identify elder financial abuse. I provided my credentials, my firm's contact information, and offered to forward supporting documentation. Every person I spoke with took my concerns seriously and assured me they would investigate promptly. The investigations began immediately. Within 48 hours, my parents' accounts were frozen pending review. Within a week, they were required to appear before a caseworker to demonstrate their mental competency and explain their recent financial decisions. I learned about their situation through legitimate channels. The same professional network that had helped me build my case now kept me informed about the investigation's progress. The first call came on a Thursday evening. I was reviewing case files when my phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. Madison? The voice was older, shakier than I remembered, but unmistakably my mother's. This is Madison Sterling, I replied using my professional voice. Madison, it's Mom. We need to talk to you. I'm sorry. Who is this? It's your mother, Patricia Sterling. Please, we need your help. I don't believe I know anyone by that name. I said calmly. Are you perhaps looking for legal representation? I work in estate planning and elder law. There was a long pause. Madison, please, don't do this. We know you're behind what's happening to us. I'm not sure what you're referring to. If you're experiencing financial difficulties, I'd recommend consulting with a qualified attorney. Our accounts are frozen. We can't access our money. The bank is treating us like criminals. That sounds concerning, I replied, making notes as if she were a potential client. Are you by any chance experiencing cognitive difficulties? Sometimes banks freeze accounts when they suspect elder abuse or diminished capacity. We're not senile, my father's voice came through the phone. He'd apparently been listening on speaker. Of course not, I said smoothly. But if your accounts are frozen, there must be some legitimate concern about your financial management. Have you made any large, unusual transactions recently? Any high-risk investments or transfers that might appear suspicious? The silence on the other end was telling. "We want to see you," my mother said finally. "We're flying to Connecticut tomorrow. I maintain office hours Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I replied. "Would you like to schedule a consultation?" "My rate is $450 per hour." "Madison, we're your parents. Are you?" I wasn't aware I had any family. I've been quite independent since my 21st birthday. Another long pause. "We'll pay your fee," my father said quietly. "We need your help." I scheduled them for a Friday afternoon appointment, giving myself time to prepare for what would be our first face-to-face meeting in 4 years. When they walked into my office that Friday, I barely recognized them. My father looked older, grayer, and defeated. My mother had aged dramatically. Her hair was completely white, and she'd lost the confident bearing I remembered. They sat across from my desk like any other clients seeking help with a financial crisis. "Thank you for seeing us," my mother began. "Of course. I understand you're experiencing some banking difficulties. Why don't you start by explaining the situation?" For the next hour, they detailed their financial nightmare. Their accounts had been frozen for 2 weeks. They'd been required to undergo cognitive assessments, provide documentation for every major transaction from the past 2 years, and submit to interviews with social workers and bank investigators. They'd hired lawyers in Florida, but the investigation was ongoing, and their access to funds remained restricted. They were staying in a budget hotel and had been forced to put their house up for sale to generate cash flow. "We've lost almost everything," my father said, his voice breaking. "The house sale will leave us with maybe $300,000 after paying off the mortgage and our debts." "That's unfortunate," I replied, taking notes. "What specific assistance are you seeking?" "We know you did this," my mother said, her voice hollow. "We know you used your position to destroy us." I looked up from my notes. "That's a serious accusation. Are you suggesting I filed false reports?" "We're saying you used our decision about your independence, to get revenge." "Let me understand this correctly," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You believe that because you chose to end your financial support when I turned 21, I somehow orchestrated a legitimate investigation into your financial affairs?" "Yes," my father said simply. "That would suggest you believe there was something inappropriate about your financial behavior. Otherwise, why would a legitimate investigation be problematic?" They stared at me across the desk, these two people who had once held absolute power over my life, now desperate and broken, asking me to save them. "What do you want?" my mother whispered. I considered the question carefully. What did I want? For 4 years, I'd imagined this moment, planned for it, dreamed of it. I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, powerful. Instead, I felt empty. "I want you to understand," I said finally, "what it feels like to have the people who are supposed to protect you decide you're expendable. We were trying to help you grow. You abandoned me on my birthday," I interrupted, my professional composure cracking slightly. "You planned it for months. You isolated me from family support. You changed your phone numbers. You took out a life insurance policy on me and then threw me away like garbage. The insurance policy was just in case I didn't survive your lesson in independence." They both looked down at their hands. "You wanted me to learn about financial security," I continued. "Well, I did. I learned that money is power, that family is a luxury I can't afford, and that the only person I can depend on is myself." "Madison," my father said. "We're sorry. We made mistakes." "You made choices," I corrected, "and now you're living with the consequences, just like I did." "What will it take?" my mother asked. "What do you want from us?" I looked at these broken people who had created me, and then tried to destroy me. They'd taught me everything I needed to know to become exactly what they were seeing now, someone who could dismantle their lives with the same cold calculation they'd used to dismantle mine. "I want you to rebuild your lives the same way I rebuilt mine," I said, "with no help, no safety net, and no one to call when things get difficult." "We're in our 60s, my father protested. "We can't start over like a young person." I was 21 with no experience, no resources, and no family. You have life experience, professional skills, and each other. You're actually better equipped than I was. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built my new life. There is one thing I'll do for you, I said without turning around. What? My mother asked eagerly. I'll make sure the investigation concludes that you're competent to manage your own affairs. Your accounts will be unfrozen, and you'll be free to continue making your own financial decisions. Thank you, my father said. Don't thank me yet, I replied, turning back to face them. Because I'm also going to make sure that every financial institution in Florida knows about your history of abandoning family members and making high-risk investments with retirement funds. Your credit will reflect your actual financial judgment, and your future borrowing capacity will be based on your demonstrated reliability. You're destroying us, my mother whispered. No, I said, returning to my desk. I'm giving you the same gift you gave me on my 21st birthday, the opportunity to prove you can survive without family support. I sat back down and picked up my pen. Your consultation fee is $450. How would you like to pay? They wrote me a check with shaking hands, gathered their things, and walked out of my office and my life. I never saw them again, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd moved to a small apartment in Tampa, where my father worked part-time at a clinic, and my mother sold insurance. They survived, just like I did. The difference was that when I rebuilt my life, I became stronger, smarter, and more capable than I'd ever been when I had their support. I kept their check for $450 framed on my office wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the people who try to destroy us. 5 years later, I opened my own practice specializing in family financial disputes and elder protection. I help people who've been abandoned, exploited, or manipulated by their own families. I teach them how to rebuild, how to protect themselves, and how to turn their survival into strength. Because that's what my parents really taught me, not on purpose but through their betrayal. They taught me that the only security worth having is the security you build yourself, and that the only family you can truly count on is the one you choose. They wanted to teach me independence. Mission accomplished. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.